Thank you for joining us for this conversation today on the Sword and the Trowel. Today, Pastor Tom and I talk about our friend Voddie Baucham and his life and ministry and the legacy that he left here, and just want to honor him in our conversations, talk about some of our experiences with him, and the plans of Founders and Founders Seminary moving forward. So I hope it's a helpful conversation for you. Take a listen. Welcome to The Sword and the Trowel. The Sword and the Trowel is a podcast of Founders Ministries, and Founders exist for the recovery of the gospel and the reformation of local churches. I'm Graham Gunden.
I'm Tom Ascol.
Today, what we want to do is we want to spend some time discussing the life and legacy of our dear friend, Voddie Baucham. He passed just a few weeks ago on September 25th, 2025. And he was a friend to both of us and a leader in the Reformed evangelical world. And so we want to spend some time honoring his legacy and speaking about the ways in which the Lord used him in ministry here.
Yeah, it's a significant loss for everyone who knew Voddie and knew of Voddie. Certainly, we need to be much in prayer for Bridget, his widow, and the children that are now fatherless in this world. But Voddie was a public Christian, very much so, a world Christian, because his ministry was worldwide, and that's been demonstrated just by the comments that have come in from people that he never met personally, but knew of him through his writings, and his teachings have been recorded and made available on the internet, and then people who did know him. And it's interesting, I've tried to assess this over the last few weeks since he's departed this world for the presence of Christ. There's so many people that he contacted, that he had, some relationship with, who feel very close to him. And I think that's a commentary on his personality. I've had one other friend in my life like that, who, when he died, and I went to his memorial service, listening to the testimonies of people all over who just felt like, Ted was their best friend, and because of the way he welcomed them and enveloped them in love. And I think Voddie had a lot of that in him as well. And yet, he was first and foremost a husband and a father and a grandfather. And so I think sometimes in our grief and in our expressions of appreciation, we can lose sight of the fact that, no, he was a real man with a real family life, a real private life. And we, in our expressions of grief and sorrow and thanksgiving, need to always remember the family. And so we want to do that, and we're grateful for Voddie leading his family to Cape Coral, to Grace Baptist Church. And so Bridget and their younger children are in the church, and we look forward to walking with them down this road that is sorrowful and yet is hopeful because of what Voddie believed, what God taught him, what God entrusted to him, and what he stewarded well with his life and ministry.
Yeah, and on that note, just in a practical measure, I mean, there's Voddie was the breadwinner in his family, and he was able to bring home what the family needed through his public speaking and through his writing, etc. And now their family, the Baucham family, is without that. And so, we just want to let you guys know that you have the opportunity to help the Baucham family. Pastor Tom has set up a Give, Send, Go in order to provide for their needs financially with the loss of their husband and father. And so we'll put a link to that Give, Send, Go in the show notes, and make sure you check that out. And if the Lord leads you, support the Baucham family. And, Voddie was his death is one that's felt so broadly because he affected so many people. Like you said, so many people felt like they knew him, even if they never got to meet him in person, or they maybe met him in person briefly at a conference. And I witnessed this, I don't know how many times. I mean, he was so willing and so ready to engage with people after his public speaking engagements. And he was so kind, ready to take pictures with people, and people felt like they were welcomed by him. People felt like they loved him. But so many just listened to him speak to them for hours. I mean, there are so many who, he was their favorite preacher. And so they'd go on YouTube, or they'd listen to him on sermon audio. And they go to him for mentorship and for counseling on different issues, whether it be on marriage or on family or on education or the importance of the church. And so it makes sense that so many people feel so deeply the loss of Voddie. But it's important, like you said, to remember that, yeah, he was a father and a grandfather and a husband, and there certainly are those who are feeling the loss much more deeply than any of us are.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so pray for Bridget and all the children and the grandchildren as well. The Lord will sustain them, and Bridget's full of faith. She's a strong woman, but living a life now that she never envisioned, never wanted to live. I've tried to assess in the broader picture and then just in the personal relationship dynamics with Voddie, the significance of his death. And that'll be told over time and generations, and historians will have to sort out some of those things. But, his death comes on the heels of other significant deaths this year.
Mm-hmm.
And so we lost John MacArthur and James Dobson, and then Charlie Kirk.
Mm-hmm.
And, we've been without R.C. Sproul for quite a while now, a few years. And then Voddie. So, what is this? Well, I don't know. There's several things that we just know to be true. And one of the most important things we can do as Christians is remind ourselves of what hasn't changed, because so much has changed. We think, oh my goodness, we're without these key voices, these wonderful, gifted men that were doing great work and helped out in so many areas of the world for those of us who know and love Christ and want to see Christ receive the honor that he's due. These were champions in a lot of ways. So, what are we going to do now? Well, we need to do what God's always called us to do, because the most important things haven't changed. Jesus is still on his throne. These were servants, and the servants have departed, but the master remains. And the master is working all things after the counsel of his own will. He is working all things for the good of those who love him, have been called according to his purpose. He is going to fulfill every last one of his promises. And we thank God for those that he entrusts to us that become meaningful and useful to us and helpful to us. But we realize that they are his servants, and he is the master. He is the one that used them as instruments. And so we shouldn't be despondent. In our grief, we have hope. In our grief, we remember truth. And that's what Voddie believed. That's what Voddie taught. And he knew that he was not going to be here forever, just like every Christian knows. And he tried to steward his time the best he could, using the gifts God's given him. And those gifts in that time was incredibly beneficial for the Church of Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think about the impact of Voddie's ministry. There really was not another man like him. Particularly when you think about like confessional Reformed Baptists, like solid doctrine, and MacArthur is solid, but he's not confessional,
Right.
And R.C. Sproul, obviously very solid, but he was not Baptist.
Right.
There was not another man like Voddie with the skills that he had and the gifts that he had and the intellect that he had and the rhetorical abilities and the ability to write. And just his personality, that is not another man like him, particularly within the Reformed Baptist world. And so he will be sorely missed, but grateful for the ways in which the Lord used him for decades leading up to this point.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I've talked about this privately, that sometimes because he was put together the way that he was, and he was received into a lot of circles that many Reformed Baptists are skeptical of,
Right,
and would never be received in, people became suspicious within our own camp. Reformed Baptists became suspicious of Voddie. Well, can he really be confessional? Is he what's more? There's got to be more to the story. And he was just an unpretentious guy who didn't mind having friends that were on various sides of issues that he was opposed to.
Yeah, he was too effective and too popular to be considered solid by a lot of Reformed Baptists.
That's right. Yeah, why isn't this guy getting marginalized all the time?
If you're gonna be solid, you got to be a lot more boring than Voddie Baucham.
Yeah, and he was wonderfully gifted. Good night. He could turn a phrase, and somebody ought to compile just a book of the Voddieisms.
I have a book in my study called Adrianisms. We need one called Voddieisms.
Voddieisms, that's right. That would be a book. If you want to put that together, contact Founders Press. We'll be glad to talk to you about that. Well, Voddie didn't have a silver spoon in his mouth when he was born.
Mm.
He wasn't born with a lot of advantages. And as a pastor, one of the things that I've tried to think through in my own life, my own history, but helping people in our church, and especially men, young men, is, you can be born with advantages or disadvantages, and all of us are with both in some degree or another, but some have more significant disadvantages than others. And those disadvantages are real, and you can't pretend like they're not real. And you can't just say, get over it, or, why don't you do what everybody else who's your age that was born with a silver spoon in their mouth is doing right now. I mean, there's just there's a real difference. And Barron Trump has had many more opportunities than your children or my children will have. It's just the way that God in his providence ordered things. But that doesn't mean that because you don't have every advantage that someone else has, you can't do what God's called you to do and excel in areas and pursue excellence in whatever sphere God's given you. And Voddie did that. So he was born to a mom who effectively was a single mom. The dad left very quickly in inner city LA. She was a Buddhist, I think, at the time. And, everybody in his family, all his friends they were going down the gangster life. And that's pretty much where he was headed as well, until his mother, out of sacrificial love, took him to live with an uncle in North Carolina who, if I remember right, I think he was a Vietnam vet. He was a military guy. And he whipped Voddie into shape. I mean, Voddie learned about authority. He learned about respect. He learned about honor. And when they moved back to Texas, he became a high school football star. Really had a lot going for him. Back then, we didn't have 5 stars or 4 stars and that type of thing. We had blue chips. And Voddie was a blue chip athlete in San Antonio, tight end. And he wanted to go into one of the military academies. And that didn't work out, or something happened where I don't know if he didn't get an appointment or something. So he wound up at the last minute going to New Mexico, or maybe New Mexico State. Well, it was a college in New Mexico. Played for a year, did really well, transferred to Rice. But in that year in New Mexico, God sent him there, which I think the coach that recruited him left before he got there even, so it was just really weird. But while he was there, a Christian campus minister took him under his wing, began to witness to him, and led him to Christ. And he became a Christian, goes to Rice, I think spends a year there. I think that's where he met Bridget, actually. And as new Christians, he's a new Christian, figuring out what to do. So he transfers to Houston Baptist. Football is no longer an interest to him. And he goes to Houston Baptist and enrolls and tries to matriculate. And they tell him, well, you can get a discount on your tuition if you're Southern Baptist. And they said, oh, what's a Southern Baptist? And they said, well, you got to be a member of Southern Baptist Church. He said, okay, where are they? And are there any black ones? And so, he goes and joins the Southern Baptist Church and gets the discount and finishes his education there. And I mean, God gifted him. He went to Southwestern Seminary, Southeastern Seminary, did a D-Min there, was in all the right circles. People looked at him and said, man, here's a gifted man. This is a guy that's really gifted. And quite honestly, he and I talked about this. It's, he's a black man. He's a gifted black man. And so he had all these kind of things that were afforded him and made available to him because of that, until they began to realize what he believed, and he began to develop his theology and his convictions. And some of those convictions were way ahead of the curve, at least in my orbit. So I remember, I think I met Voddie maybe 2003, 4, something like that, because he was on the circuit then speaking for homeschooling organizations, and we were homeschoolers. And we had just produced a few years before that, the Truth and Grace memory books for kids, catechizing your kids. And every once in a while, man, we get these massive orders for these Truth and Grace memory books. And where did this, why? Where are we getting this? We started tracing it down. And it was like everywhere Voddie spoke.
And those were the original Truth and Grace memory books. Those were those beauties that.
Hey, look, man, yeah, that's those are what do you call those?
Those are vintage.
Vintage. That's the word I'm looking for. Very vintage, but the content was basically the same. And then somehow I just connected with him because he started ordering them too, and so he and I talked on the phone, and finally we were able to meet in person here in Southwest Florida, like 2005, 2006. But back then, I remember him reaching out to me because he and I think a guy named Bruce Short had worked on a resolution on public education,
Mm,
basically saying, get your kids out of the education system, the
hmm
public education system. And I thought, I mean, yeah, we're not putting our kids in there, but for you to tell everybody not to do that, all
hmm
Christians shouldn't, it just seemed a little bit beyond the pale for me. But he was dead right.
hmm
Yeah, he was just right a lot sooner
Yeah.
than I came to see it.
Yeah, he was that way on a lot of things. I remember just recently there's a clip going around of him being interviewed on CNN, and the interviewer is just grilling him on feminism, and he just is not backing down at all. And that was in a day. I mean, this probably was 15, 20 years ago at least. This was in a day where, people in evangelicalism didn't necessarily like feminism, but they're not going to go on CNN and trash feminism, but Voddie Baucham, much like John MacArthur, just did not care. He was
Yeah.
going to speak the truth. And there are so many issues like that he was just ahead of the curve on: cultural, political, philosophical, theological issues. And that's one of the things. I mean, like, he was so solid when it comes to, biblical theology, covenant theology, the doctrines of grace, all that kind of stuff, which, amen for that. But when it came to cultural issues, boy,
Mm,
he was so good. He was so insightful. And again, that's another thing that we just don't have a lot of that,
yeah.
particularly in Reformed Baptist circles.
Yeah, that's right. I think his giftedness to think about culture and from an apologetic standpoint, I mean,
Hmm
he realized what he came from, what his circumstances were, which the Lord delivered him out of, and he just always had a burden for the world and for culture, and so he was thinking about things a lot quicker than certainly I did,
hmm
and that I think many in our circles did, and he realized that our theology actually speaks to these things because again, so much of the world in which we inhabit theologically looks upon sanctification and pietism as almost a narrow subjective type of reality.
hmm
We wouldn't say it this way because we see the fallacy in the me and Jesus idea,
hmm
but it's pretty much that. Me and Jesus, or maybe me and the church and Jesus.
hmm
But whenever you start talking about politics, whenever you start talking about authority, whenever you start talking about power,
hmm
oh no, 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 no. We eschew all that
hmm
because Christians should not seek power or authority. If you do that, well, then what do you have to say about the meek and mild Jesus?
hmm
So Voddie saw through all of that and realized, no, 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 no. That the whole world belongs to King Jesus,
hmm
and the whole world needs to be addressed by their king and held accountable to do what their king says that
hmm
they ought to do. And that developed in him over time. He became more articulate about that. But he saw those things way sooner than anybody else I know in our camp, in
Yeah.
the Reformed Baptist world.
Yeah, and if you want a taste of that, I mean, you can go on YouTube and listen to a lot of his sermons on education or on marriage or on family or cultural Marxism. I think he preached a wonderful sermon on cultural Marxism and then ethnic Gnosticism at the
Mhm.
Founders Pre-Conference. Was it 4 or 5 years ago?
Oh, it's longer than that.
Was it?
Yeah,
I
it's
guess
like
I'm getting old.
2018 or something. Yeah,
Yeah, I guess that's
yeah,
true. Yeah.
yeah.
But then also, there's founders at the Founders Study Center has a course from Voddie on theology and ethics where he talks about a lot of those things. And so they're college level lectures. If you go to study.founders.org, you can get a hold of those lectures there. But he was so helpful, even for me, but also I think for founders in the broader evangelical world as well. When we, especially thinking about like ethnic Gnosticism, boy, we just went crazy back in 2019, 2020,
Mhm.
2021, and even before. You think about like the Ferguson riots. We went like crazy on race issues
Yeah.
in the conservative evangelical
Oh, yeah.
world. And once again, Voddie was one of the first to kind of stand up and say, "No, we're not going there. That's all dumb."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You remember when Michael Brown was killed in the altercation with a police officer outside of St. Louis,
Hmm
and man, everybody lost their minds. Well,
hmm
Voddie wrote an article for TGC that broke the server. I mean, it just crashed. It couldn't handle it because he basically said Michael Brown was wrong.
mm
Michael Brown was a thug,
mm
and Michael Brown had justice dealt to him. And people accused him of just being, anything but a Christian, basically. And so Ed Stetzer organized this deal. I think it was in Memphis. And I believe that was like 2014 or something, that he called a time to speak. And so he had Voddie and it's one of the Loritz, maybe Brian Loritz, I think. Thabiti was on there. Darren Patrick was on there, and I forget several others. But it wound up being Voddie against the world. Time to speak about race relations. And Voddie took them on one by one. I mean, and they came at him in every direction, and he just kept cutting it down. Not at all. Thabiti comes out with the name of a lot of black folks that had died, on his T-shirt, and Voddie addressed that in a very effective way too. I remember watching a video of that. It's on YouTube. You can watch it. But when we met in Dallas in what was that, 2018, I guess it was.
The Statement on Social Justice.
Right. Yeah. We met in Dallas in June 2018 to see what we could do about the whole social justice movement, because Voddie had been doing this for a long time. I'd been engaged maybe in a year or two in it. Others had been there longer than me, but there was about 13 of us, I think, that met at Herb's Coffee Shop in Dallas. And
there's a picture somewhere.
There are pictures. Yeah, there are pictures, and well, anyway, there are pictures. But we had a video set up in that little conference room, and we played this clip of Voddie on this panel with all these guys, and Ed's coming at him, everybody's coming at him, and Voddie just, man, he deflects and he parries and he just he nails them. And John MacArthur's sitting there and he's watching it. And so after we finish it, he turns and looks at Voddie. He says, "You just pitched a no-hit shutout." And God gifted him with a quick mind, and with a real careful and studied understanding of things. And he was ahead of the curve on certainly the race issues, because the whole evangelical world, I mean, certainly the SBC, but not just the SBC, got played horribly by race baiters and people who thought that they were honoring Jesus by the way that they believed we ought to be talking about race. And part of the difficulty with that is, does racism, does sinful partiality exist? Absolutely. Did Voddie experience it? Absolutely. He experienced it. I mean, I've been with him in some of those situations, and yet he didn't let those experiences cloud him to biblical truth. And that's happened so often. So even like right now at Southeastern Seminary, they had this kingdom diversity department. They had a kingdom diversity vice president. They want to make Southeastern Seminary look like the kingdom of heaven, like heaven, it's just a joke. So they've changed the name of that because that no longer plays. And so now it's, what is it, the Revelation 5:17 or whatever program. But it's the same thing. They give scholarships to anybody who is in what they perceive to be an oppressed category.
Anyone who's not a white man.
That's pretty much it. Yeah, straight white man, you don't qualify. But anybody else. And Voddie saw through all that nonsense. And, I don't know. One of the last conversations I had with him, I one day maybe we'll talk about it, but it was on this very issue and his own experiences with it. And just, how grateful he was to be a part of the founding of Founders Seminary, to be the president of this seminary, because it was free from that kind of nonsense. And he saw it. He didn't try to manipulate that. He didn't take advantage of it, which he could have very easily. He resisted it even when it cost him.
Well, and that's one of the things about Voddie is he was not steerable.
Yeah.
He was a man of conviction that he could, as successful as he was, as effective as he was, he could have been more successful in a worldly sense had he just kind of gone along with things.
Yeah.
In so many different ways. He was promised the moon in different periods of his life, and he just said, "I'm not going to go there. I don't believe that. I can't do those things." And he sacrificed for almost 10 years in Africa. Gave up everything to go see African Christian University established and to be the dean of theology there. the School of Theology, and he labored there hard. And then he sacrificed to come back and to be the president of a startup seminary where he could have, done anything else.
Yeah.
But he believed in it, and he was not going to be steered by wealth or by the leftist gaze or by the female gaze or by anything else. He was going to do what he thought was right, and he was going to operate based on his convictions.
Yeah, and I've seen that up close and personal, and certainly worked with him in those kinds of initiatives. And most recently and lastingly, God willing, is IOPT and Founders Seminary. But I remember one time, shortly after we met, he was in my living room. We're sitting there, and he had to take a phone call. And so this phone call, he got pretty animated, and I mean, his voice was rising, and he was digging in his heels. And so when he was finished, I said, "Man, what was that all about?" And he said, "Well," it was a phone call about a publisher that had a book from him that they already had contract on, and everything's moving forward. And because of pressure from an outside source about something that he said in one of the chapters, they wanted that chapter taken out. And Voddie said, "No way." And so the agent was talking to him and said, "Well, if this is going to kill the deal." So I don't care. I'm not taking that chapter out. And man, he was hot. And so I'm right. He was right. And again, could have been very easy for him to take it out, very lucrative for him to take it out. I mean, I know of situations, even some that have happened in the last year, when he was moving from Zambia to the United States, coming back home, of opportunities that were dangled in front of him, and things that people used to try to entice him that he just said no to. And, and he did it because of conviction. And it's one of the things that, man, made me so excited about what we had in mind and were wanting to pursue together for Founders Seminary. Because you recall, you were here back in 2020. The world's lost its mind. COVID's nuts. And we made some efforts at Founders to try to do some very significant things. God shut the door at the last minute on one of those. But in shutting that door, the idea dawned, well, why don't we just do something here in Cape Coral? And so, man, I'm the first phone call that I made when it became clear to me, yeah, we ought to try to do something to train men to handle what we're living through. Because a lot of the pastors I knew, loved, and respected, and certainly myself, we weren't trained this way. I mean, and so many guys just folded. Good guys just folded. One really good pastor, somebody asked him in a phone conference I was on, well, when are you going to open the church doors again? He says, when the government tells me I can. I mean, so that was just, and this is not a bad guy. This is a really good guy. So my first phone call was to Voddie, and it was the middle of the night in Zambia. I always would text him first to make sure, we could find a time to talk. But I just called him. I said, "Man, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think? Would love for you to be a founding faculty member." I said, "I'm in." I mean, he didn't 30 seconds. It's done with him. And then whenever last October, Peter Sammons and I had been talking for weeks. What seemed like God was developing before us was, hey, I mean, you got the opportunity for a new seminary here, because we have been training men, praise God for that, but the IOPT is not specifically for pastors. That's the way we started, but there was so much interest in other things, and we had so many other opportunities we couldn't say no to try to develop out a little bit, that it became apparent, well, we need something even more rigorous for pastors who are going to be in the trenches in this world and the world to come. And so should we consider starting an actual seminary that's going to have a rigorous program to it? The way that we came to articulate it was, we want to see men with sharp minds, warm hearts, steel spines. And we agreed to do that. I mean, Peter was here, and it was just like, okay, this is what we think to be God's will. And then within 2 weeks, Voddie texted me and said, "Hey, you're never going to believe this." He said, "We got a buyer for our house, cash, and it's enough that we're going to be able to move to Southwest Florida, Cape Coral." He said, "The only hitch is we got to get out by December 1st. And so this is like 6 weeks, So I called him. I said, "Well, you're never going to believe what we just decided, man. So we'd love to have you come be a part of this." I said, "What are your plans?" And so we were negotiating all that over the next couple of months, because he wasn't sure he wanted to give up completely his itinerant ministry, but he didn't want to do it as much as he'd been doing it. He still had some other plans for projects that were going to be very time consuming. But by the time the Founders Conference rolled around in 2025, January, he was fully on board. We could announce it. And then shortly after that, we were able to announce he's going to be the founding president. And man, we had great plans. And those plans are going to go forward by God's grace. I mean, there's some incredible opportunities. Voddie lent his power, his energy, his thoughts to what we were doing. They're baked into the foundation of where we are headed, and we, don't look forward to doing this without him. But we're not slowing down, and we're going forward, which is exactly what he would want us to do.
Yeah.
I mean, even the thought of, well, oh no, what do we do? We've got to shift gears. I mean, Voddie would just have all our hides.
Yeah.
If we just said, no, we can't do it. Not now. No, not at all. This is the time. The need is greater than it's ever been. Founders Seminary is going forward. We got some great changes coming with IOPT as well that he was very much on board with. And God has done some wonderful things there. So his legacy, his final mission in his stewardship of the gifts that God's given him, I'm so happy that it's right here with what we believe and what we're laboring to see God do in providing training for men through Founders Seminary, men and women through what is now IOPT, and through the ongoing proclamation of the gospel that he knew, loved, and wanted others to come to know and love.
Yeah, and the Lord will continue to use Voddie. I mean, Voddie has received his reward, and he's rejoicing in heaven now. But the Lord will continue to use him here, much in the same way that the Lord continues to use Martin Lloyd-Jones or an R.C. Sproul in his books and in his sermons. And as a model that, the students of Founders Seminary and many of us will look to and say, yeah, that's a man that the Lord used and gifted in these particular ways, who had these particular virtues, and I'm going to follow him as he followed Christ. And I'm going to try to have the same ambition that he had. I'm going to try to develop the same skills that he developed. I'm going to believe the way that he believed.
Yeah, that's right. And he died well. He died without scandal.
Yeah.
I hate the fact that he's gone from us, but I praise God that the Lord kept him, preserved him. And, one of my funeral hymns is "O Sacred Head Now Wounded." And so my family knows this, but the line in there that just rivets me is, "Oh Lord, let me never, never outlive my love to thee. Should I fainting be, let me never outlive my love to thee." And so if I die tragically or unexpectedly or whenever and haven't been scandalized, then God's answered my prayer, so, and that's what I think all of us as Christians want. And yeah, his legacy lives on, and maybe in ways that are going to be even more broadly appreciated than some of those other guys you mentioned, because Voddie's been out there for so long on the internet. I'm thinking of John MacArthur has these institutions he built. He's got books, and he's got his sermons on the radio that primarily is where they were first distributed. But Voddie, as almost as soon as it was accessible, people began recording him and making it available through the internet.
Yeah, it's interesting. So when I first came across Voddie, it must have been like 2010 or something like that, 2009, just fresh out of high school. And it's such a weird story. So one of my friends was in a gas station. Somebody was stopping for gas and decided they were going to evangelize my friend. Now, my friend was already a Christian, but he gave them a thumb drive with a bunch of sermons on it. And this thumb drive started passing around in my friend's circle, and it was just loaded up with Voddie Baucham sermons and R.C. Sproul sermons and John Paul Washer's Shocking Youth sermon. Yeah, absolutely. And everyone's like, who is this guy at the gas station? It must have been, maybe God sent an angel or something, because everyone's like digging into Reformed theology for the first time ever. I came to find out later that this guy was actually, weird story. the man who had become my brother-in-law, it was his cousin's husband visiting from out of state. Nobody knew him. It was crazy. But that was my first introduction to Voddie in this little thumb drive. You could, back when we used MP3s. And we'd listen to his sermons, and then we started to find him online. And it's just that kind of, the Lord uses today with modern technology, his kind of teaching, his sermons in such an interesting way, a way that, radio was the medium of the past.
That's right.
And before that, just spoken word and books and writing. But the Lord uses different mediums now, because we use different mediums now. And it's more invasive than it was previously, which when it comes to the preaching of the gospel is a wonderful thing.
Yeah. And I would just commend, if you have not watched and listened to Voddie's last two messages, you got to do that. The last sermon that he preached on the Lord's Day was preached here at Grace Baptist Church just 5 days or 4 days before he died. So he preached on this on a Sunday, and then the Lord took him home on Thursday, and he preached on Ephesians 5:32. When we'd asked him to preach, he was really excited about it because he had not preached in our church as a church member.
Yeah.
And so this is the only time that he preached as a church member to Grace Baptist Church. And so we were talking. He said, well, man, what kind of things you want to preach about? So I don't know. We're always good to just kind of shore up what the church is. So he preached on Ephesians 5:32. And he never told me the title of it until he was preaching it. He said, Tom asked me what the title was, or, if I was going to tell Tom what the title is, it's Be Careful What You Say About Christ's Bride. And it was just awesome. And the next day, he and I were talking about that. He said, I got to preach in my church. I got to preach in my church. And that was Sunday. Saturday before was our convocation. First convocation for Founders Seminary. He delivered the convocation address, and it is brilliant. It's brilliant in terms of what Founders Seminary is, and by God's grace, what we are going to be, what we're going to do going forward. So we're going to link to both of those messages in the notes of this episode, but encourage you to listen to them, to pray as you do, that God would grant to founders that which we desperately need if we're going to fulfill the responsibilities he's entrusted to us. And when you pray, thank God for Voddie, and pray for Bridget, pray for his children, his grandchildren, and thank God for giving us such a wonderful gift.
Amen. And one thing that you often say that Voddie would echo is find a healthy church and build your life around it. So Voddie had a big fan base, and people would follow him around to different conferences, and because they'd love to hear his preaching, and he preached the truth. And so people who loved his preaching felt like, yeah, I love the truth and I want to hear the truth. But a lot of people would follow him around to conferences to hear his preaching, but would never unite themselves to a local church because they felt like, well, Voddie's my pastor.
Right.
Voddie would abhor that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Voddie would hate that there would be people who would treat him as their pastor just because you listen to his sermons, but you wouldn't have your own pastor. You wouldn't have your own elders. You wouldn't have your own body that you were united to. And so this is a challenge. If there are any of our listeners out there who are not members of good, healthy local churches because you think that you can get what you need spiritually just on YouTube and online, listening to Voddie sermons, Voddie would tell you that is not true. Just go and listen to his last sermon that he ever preached in this world, and it will become clear to you that you need to find a good local church and build your life around it.
Amen.
And if you have the opportunity, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, go to the Give, Send, Go that's going to be in the show notes, and see if you're able to support Voddie's family. He's got 7 children still at home. I mean, that's a lot of mouths to feed, and many of them are getting ready to launch out into the world, and now they don't have their father. And so there are a lot of needs there. And so if you can go to that Give, Send, Go page and see what the Lord would put on your heart to give to Bridget and to the children, that would be a wonderful, wonderful thing. Thank you for joining us today for this conversation about Voddie's life and ministry. If it's been a helpful conversation for you, you can like and subscribe. We appreciate that. And then also share with people that you think it might be helpful to as well. And we will see you next time.